Greetings for anyone who's tuning in. Started a few minutes late. Busy doing a few things. The least of which was some music practice. Adjust the mic a little bit. There we go. I think we're probably good. I was getting some background noise the last session, which is good considering a few sessions ago I didn't have any real audio going on. Hang out a little bit and see if anybody pops in. So I had someone ask if I'm going to be on tonight, so I'm on now. Send out a couple bulletins. Don't forget, I can't see you if you're. Who we got here? Oh, we got Tom. Tom just made it in. Wendell Burke. How's it going there? Let's see if any other usual suspects appear before we start our important and meaningful topics. Volume is still quiet compared to everything else. Yeah, I've been playing around with that. I've got to get a better mic setup, I think. I've got a fairly good Shure broadcast mic here. I just turned down the volume a little bit on it. I don't know if that helps. Just turned it back up. Just post this link up. So people know where to find it. All right, shut down that annoying window. That's a little better. Yeah, yeah. I had the mic closer to me. Then I moved it back. Yeah, we're gonna have to work on the sound, obviously. I probably just have to get my good microphone out, Shure, and set it up. I have a mic stand too. I'll just get a mic stand next week. This one can be set up on a mic stand as well. If I hold it, if it's too close to the machine, it gets the fan noise. There's Peach. What's going on? Yeah, it's a few minutes late. Kind of lost track of time there. Working on stuff. You can see I have my fancy mic set up here. So yeah, had a lot of discussions recently with both of my groups. Totally unrelated. Yeah, Yeti's good. I mean, the Shure is good. It's just I think I need to get a better setup for it, positioning it towards my face. I have like I said, I have a really good recording microphone that I could set up, and that's like, you know, that's what I've recorded professional stuff with. This I just have handy on my desktop, and I think I'm finally just getting everything equalized on this new setup. So, yeah, I'll get that set up for next week then. So, how's everyone doing? Anything exciting? caught a little bit of your stream, PJ. Your Dead by Dawn. That was fun. Oh, good. Yeah. Well, I was just gonna say it's actually what happened when PJ and his crew ran their game stream the other night. I was actually painting miniatures and I totally lost track of time. I was like, oh man, they said they were gonna start at 7 o'clock. It was like 8:30. So I kind of logged in. Then I saw you were having some tech difficulties earlier, but then I got it. Then I got it running. Yeah. Well, that's good. Yeah. Cool. Dead by Daylight. Sorry. Yeah, I haven't actually played that one. I've seen it played. I've heard it talked about. I saw it played the night when you guys played it, but I didn't. I haven't actually played that one before. Cool. So the cryomech tanks are they? With the friends because we're. Yeah, yeah. Even when I was doing video games, online gaming more, pickups were not my thing. Tom, the cryomech tanks are they another brand besides GW, or are they? I'm so out of 40K. I have absolutely no idea what's even out there at this point. Yeah. Well, what I've always said about MMOs and online gaming is what makes it great is also what makes it terrible, and that's that you have to deal with all these other people, right? I mean, that was always kind of the weird thing. Like MMOs, I felt like counted because it was this persistent world, but then you have just you either get into a raid or into a PvP, and you're like, wow, these people are horrible. And then it's funny because I'm kind of like, oh, cool. Yeah, you're kind of like, all right, but what's kind of cool is I'm walking around with all these other people. That's what's kind of cool about those games, but that's also what just makes it awful sometimes. I think we've probably talked about it. We lost like real life friends over World of Warcraft, and that was kind of when I just dipped out of it. I mean, I did the early MMOs. I did EverQuest. I did UO, and that was enough because you kind of knew that was just like chaos and every man for himself or woman for themselves, and just people attempting to like shank you at every moment. But then in Warcraft, you'd be like, all right, we got done with this raid, and some guy like swipes all the gear and vanishes. You're like, really? Like, really? We all just spent 3 hours on this or whatever. Like I said, the last time we had a blowout. Yeah. I dropped the topic of the session. Well, this is kind of leads into that whole topic, right? I mean, there was a dude that we played Warcraft with who's super interesting guy, but he literally got up in the morning, he was on Warcraft, he played all day, he had a night job watching servers, he logged out for the 15 minutes it took him to get it to work, and he played on Warcraft. And then he would, you go into a raid with this guy, and he was acting like literally your middle manager at work. And you're like, this isn't fun. There's nothing fun about this. But that actually feeds totally into the discussion, the topic for tonight, because in MMOs and in video games, I'm very casual. I mean, in high school and whatever, early college, I was much more into all of this. But anymore with video games, I'm totally casual. Totally not interested in impressing anybody. You know what I mean? I'm there to play a game. And what I found out with all those online games, it was really difficult to manage those two. It was tough to play casual and actually get anywhere. But it was even worse when you were actually like, all right, let me try to accomplish something. And it was just terrible. And it was just like this. Yeah, it's like a job, you know. And what's funny, I played all those really early games that were extremely. Who's that? Oh, all right. We got Corporate Ninja in. Help create some content. Each of them. Yeah. Well, that's and the politics are always what ruin these kinds of things. Yep. I know it's Adam. I remembered your tag. So, my whole thoughts of casual versus hardcore came in when we were discussing yesterday kind of a shift in our game scheduling with both of my groups, with both my online Warhammer or whatever group and my D&D group, or D&D Vampire Call of Cthulhu, my regular in-person group. Justin sometimes here. Andy pops in every now and then. Lauren was here last week. And in both cases, I've definitely noticed like there are these waves and these different dynamics of why people play these games. And I'm gonna start this out by saying I don't judge any of it. Like, PJ and I'm gonna imagine Adam, even though I didn't know Adam. I've known Adam for a long time, but not this long. And Tom, I haven't actually gamed with, but I've known him now for probably 15 years. From originally my student. Um, well, so that's exactly what we were talking about. Um, Hardcore tabletop. I'm sure some of you, and I remember PJ going to a con with him or meeting him at a con, and literally playing one game. Hey, there's Justin, playing one game or two games. Sometimes a LARP, sometimes other games. Literally all weekend. You got there Friday afternoon at 3 o'clock or whatever, and then you literally just kept going for hours. You didn't sleep. You barely slept, and you just played all weekend. And I was doing that with tabletop in high school, right? Yeah, get that. Yeah, and so it's Yeah, so this is everything we're discussing, and I kind of miss this. For nostalgia purposes, I miss this idea of these really focused game, and I am not prepared to sit and do an all weekend game anymore. I have to like do laundry and stuff, right? Like that's the whole thing. Real life commitments, adult commitments, definitely crash in on it, and this was a big discussion in our online group. Um, yeah, so I remember we talked about this, Tom, and you made the comment, "I'm only willing to sit down with a group if the game is it's entertaining to me as reading a book," and that's like a big part of it. And so Adam says, I don't really want to do serial games. This is a lively topic. I like it. I got to come up with more. I come up with hair trigger topics like this. I've come to the conclusion I don't really want to do serial games. Okay, we have a whole discussion about that's a whole other discussion. Yeah, friends have kids with soccer games and birthday parties. Yeah, so this is how it all happens, right? And I've definitely noticed a shift. Now, our in-person group, as Justin can testify, is extremely dedicated to the dynamic of the group. I think more so than the game. I think they're more interested in playing together than they are in whatever game we're playing. I don't think they really care. And yeah, more opposed that is more RP in depth than is opposed to build depth, right? My group is perfectly happy sitting around talking to each other in character the whole time. We still generally only played about 3 hours to 4 hours a shot for all the reasons that we've discussed. Justin's got two monster children that he has to manage and a career as a professional musician and music therapist. I'm on sabbatical now, so I can't really, you know, so I can't really say too much. But I mean, generally when I was in school, it was like, no, I can't play all weekend. I have to do the stuff I can't do when I'm in school. Um, yeah, so Fuzzy, who I actually talked to Friday on here, he was the only guy that came in during my Friday chat, which was a pop up chat. He has two young kids. He commutes, and he still plays in 4 games a week. So I wonder, like it's part of like it's a will and it's a priority thing. But I mean, do any of us really want to sit down and play for 6 or 8 hours at this point? And I'm asking that rhetorically. I don't have the answer. I'm not judging anyone for any answer. In our online game, absolutely a priority thing. And in our game, yeah, it's about making the game a priority. And that's the great thing about the weekend group that we have is that if everybody kind of says we're going to be there, unless something major happens, unless there's a major life circumstance, everybody shows up. Yeah, I can't even sleep for 6 to 8 hours at my age. I know, really. It's like, and so it's a weird thing because I think about, wow, man, we sit down on if D&D sit down on a Friday night in high school. Sometimes we were all teenagers, so we'd be over someone's house. Somebody's mom would make dinner or go get dinner. we'd eat, we'd hang out with the family for a few minutes, then we'd get back to gaming. And then sometime around, Saturday evening, we'd pop our heads up again. And part of that was just not having to do other stuff. But part of that is that what makes for a good game at this point? And how does it conflict when you have like hardcore gamers versus end of school until 5 a.m. What's the difference between hardcore gaming at this point and this deep gaming, are these marathon game sessions any more productive or actually even any more fun at this point? And it's a tough call. So Justin's like 3.5 hours to 30, 40 minutes socializing separate from the game. I mean, that's kind of what we've developed. And I think all of us are at a point in life that's half of why we get together is to sit and socialize with each other. Because we've all maintained friendships outside of the game at this point. And, let's see. And the game is good enough I can do that, though my average is about 4 hours. That's what Tom Wendell says. And I'm kind of at that point too. I mean, even our online games. So, and part of this was a whole discussion about how long do we want these games to run? And, and everybody has other priorities. Everybody involved in the online game has other things that they can do on any given night. And honestly, in the online format, like in Roll20, I'm kind of like, really 3 hours. I think I'm good. Like I couldn't sit there on my computer and Roll20 for 8 hours. I just physically couldn't, I don't think. And like my one friend Blake said, he was popped on sometimes, said, well, I think if you didn't have an in-person group, you might feel differently. And I said, no, I don't think so. So that's a good question, right? How do you define serious or hardcore gaming? Versus 30 minutes of horsing around isn't bad. So it's funny. I find Roll20 sometimes more focused than I do in-person gaming. As Justin can testify, I don't know if anyone else who's played with me in person recently. As Justin can testify, I'm kind of a taskmaster with time because we only have a limited amount of time. So it's like if we have, we know we're going to only play till 8:30, 9 o'clock. We start at 5. Maybe we eat dinner together or we just hang out for a half an hour. When the game starts, I'm kind of like, keep it on, I'm kind of like, in that regard, I'm serious. But like Tom says, what defines serious versus hardcore versus casual? And that's a good question. Is hardcore that you are deeply committed to the world and you're deeply committed to the role play, or is hardcore you want to sit there for 8 hours? Because I've sat in plenty of 8 hours games where nothing gets done. And I think Adam and I have actually sat in a couple of those games together with another group, and where we've been sitting at the table playing for 6 to 8 hours, even as recently as a few years ago, but you kind of don't feel like anything has happened. And it's okay, because part of the point of those games was also to see people we don't see frequently, so. Yeah, the game is at noon, break for food around 2 p.m. and they get back to us around 6-ish. Yeah. Well, yeah. And now, in college, that was a pretty typical thing. Yeah, we're going to start playing at noon, and we've actually only played, we've played till 8 p.m. We've only actually played 2 hours. Forget it with the groups that I knew that used to take frequent smoke breaks and do other things like that. So. Well, that's the thing, Adam. When coming up and hanging out with that crew up there, that part of it was also just to hang out with the crew we didn't see very regularly. So I didn't even really care so much that it wasn't super focused gaming. But I think there was also a weird kind of paradox going on with that, because like you guys had a regular group, or in some cases multiple regular groups. So I don't think the gaming was about being as focused as the completion of the game as say I would have wanted, because at that time I didn't have an in-person group or even an active online group. So like when I sat down to play a game, I wanted to really play a game. And when we're 3 hours later still talking about movies and ordering pizza, I'm kind of like, well, all right, we're not gaming, which is okay. Yeah, if we're just there to hang out, that's fine. Yeah, the Goblin game was really fun. I was actually shockingly thrilled by that. Yeah, well, and some of that's very situational. I mean, that's like every vampire game we run is set in an area that everybody is. Yeah, yeah, everybody is. Go showing Doug Archer. Yeah, everybody is about like exploring an environment that we're familiar with in a different context. So, Adam, you said earlier, which what I thought was interesting was that you're not interested in serial games anymore, and I, I'm very much have kind of gotten to that point as well. Yep. Yeah, exactly. Right, exactly. And that's what I've said that repeatedly about our group, Justin. You guys don't even care about like the points on the page and getting more points and getting loot. Whereas I've been in games where that's all they care about. Their idea of progression wasn't progressing a story. It was building a character like a war game piece or like a video game piece. And does that make them hardcore? Are we casual because we just like to RP? Like it's the same discussion that used to go on in MMOs, and it's just funny the conversation, totally unprompted, started about with MMOs and online gaming. Well, not totally unprompted because I was talking to Paige about his stream the other night, but it's just really funny that it started out with that, and it kind of all echoes that. Like again, I remember in Warcraft, like guys in a raid yelling at me because I didn't have the right gear, and I was like, "What is wrong with you people?" Like come on, It's like I just want to play an orc running around a landscape. Like you want to go out and grind for 10 hours before I come back. Come on. In pen and paper games, there's definitely got to be a balance of the fighting versus not. I've never had an emotional moment in an RPG. Just like I don't get emotional writing fictional characters. People are shocked by this. I'm like I have no emotional attachment to any of it. I have an intellectual puzzle attachment to solving a problem, and I like my characters, and I'd be upset if some of my characters got killed. But as far as actually feeling emotions in a game in an RPG, I mean that's a whole other discussion. Because I know people, especially some of my students, are deeply invested. Like my one now friend, former student, she has tattoos of her characters on her body, and I'm just like, wow, that's hardcore. So Adams, two things that Adam said was interesting about serial games. I mean, as most of you know, like the D&D game I've been running has been more or less a serialized campaign. And I'm still going to do that, but I'm at the point like I'm kind of interested in games that are encapsulated stories, like the last Call of Cthulhu game I ran. And I would have encapsulated that more if I did it again. I'd make that even tighter. But this idea, I like progressing the characters, but I don't necessarily need it to be a continuous start to finish story at this point. Because sometimes I think that also puts a constraint. I think that puts this weird constraint in it. But I mean, I like serialized games in the sense of developing the same groups of characters. Right, right, exactly. And I'm not, yeah. A session zero is absolutely important. In fact, we're going to be doing probably fifth ed D&D for a little bit with my online group. Uh, Whenever Neil wraps up this Warhammer segment, and Blake wants to run it, and I absolutely told him this week is session zero because Neil can't play tomorrow. So we're like, all right, let's just do a session zero. You know, let's get down and really nail all this down. I think expectations are a big part of it, and I think especially when I run the Tales of the Hard Land, the next session of that for the sit down group, we're going to sit down and work on characters together. And what's funny is we kind of did it with the vampire game. I mean, we all kind of came in with character ideas, but we sat down and we made them work together. Like we made them not work together because it's vampire, but we made the characters integrate into the setting at session zero, and we played a little bit, which was great. And this is something you said too, that it definitely strikes me, Adam, is that yeah, when I sit down and play vampire, I really want to play. Like I want to focus on the game. Call of Cthulhu, same thing. I want to be in the environment. I want to be immersed. I want all that. D&D, if there's a lot more like get up and get pizza or whatever, like to me that is the flow of that game, especially in our current groups is very loose. It's not as atmosphere contingent. And I think what game you're playing really defines how like kind of hardcore you get about it. Like whenever I start Call of Cthulhu, I send out a message to everybody. Okay, this is a different kind of game. Get there, get in the zone. The lights are going down when we actually start. If you got to answer your phone, like go ahead in the kitchen or whatever, answer your phone or whatever, and everybody gets into it. Everybody sticks to it. Yeah, occasionally there's a little switching out of zones and cracking a joke or whatever. That's fine. That's gaming. It's not supposed to be work. It's supposed to be fun. Yeah, that was such a unique game, and I really enjoyed it. I mean, I've joked around it, so that's probably the best game I've ever run, and I don't even know if I'm joking. But it was interesting because yeah, I stuck everyone with characters they weren't necessarily going to be used to or comfortable with. And like I said, originally Andy was gonna get the tech guy that Lauren got, but I'm like, that's too easy. This is what Andy does in real life, He's or at least elements of a tech business type guy. So that's why I switched that up. I made him the jock, the football player. So yeah, it's an interesting discussion, and I've been thinking a lot about it because the discussions come up with both of our groups. Like part of the whole discussion came up because we switched nights on our online game so that we could play more often, but now we've run into scheduling problems on Thursday that have just been life stuff. And we had a discussion about it and we were like, okay, but like let's define like what we want out of this. Like how hardcore are we going to be about this? Like, is it do we want and I said, look, if I'm going to slot out Thursday night to play, I want to play. And that's when Blake's like, I'd be interested in running D&D. So it's weird how some games end up being a swan song. This was just the perfect chemistry. It was the perfect chemistry, the right amount of planning, the right amount of direction, but not too much direction. The players all buying into these roles that I handed them, these teenagers in 1979 at the beach. And it just kind of all fit. Whereas I thought the last Cthulhu game I ran, for as much as I love and am invested in the Old West setting, I think I definitely should have focused it more up front. And that was me. That was my learning curve. And. So the best game I've ever run and played it. I mean, that's so broad. I mean, some of the early vampire games were some of the best because it was a totally new world. And everybody was just like, what is even going on here? Like how do we negotiate this world? I played at a con game once, unoriginally called Ender's Game, but it was one of the best because there was an anti-paladin named Ender was the villain. But it was a similar kind of thing where we were all handed a character when we got there. And not everybody was working together, not everybody was on the same side. And the point was you never actually got to fight this anti-paladin because the group was supposed to deteriorate before it ever even got there. And it was this beautifully, the guy running it was so good. And he just led you just enough so that you weren't sure what was going on, but you knew you felt in control enough. And he was really, really good. And I still remember that game. And the group I played it with was really fun too. They were just these bunch of meatheads. Like they were idiots, but not idiot. They were smart people, but like in playing their characters, they were just these idiots. And it was hilarious. Well, yeah, because like we all came out of D&D or maybe Shadowrun or something, and then we stepped into this game that was all about a story, and that impacted me greatly. And that's why I always hate to be the well, I was there when this happened guy, but unless you were really there early on playing some of those games, it was so new then, and I think people now are so used to story based games. I think they're a little bit more jaded to this idea, and it's not unusual to them. And like I said, the Rehoboth Beach game was probably one of the best games I've ever run. And I'm not, but part of it was the players too. Part of it was the players getting so into these characters and really getting into the roles and not yes, they worried about the completion of the scenario. And yes, it was a trope, it was Lovecraftian trope. There was a Dagon cult, active in town. I mean, it wasn't surprising. It was to some of the players because they hadn't really played Call of Cthulhu before. But, you know, if you had played Call of Cthulhu before, you would have seen this end coming a mile away. You just would have known what was happening. But I think all told, there is, yeah, modern lingo doesn't help us understand. There is something to be said, and this kind of echoes back to what Adam said about serialized games. This game had a very distinct beginning, start, and end. And the characters played through it, and they had a lot of agency, but there also were finite things that activated, events that triggered throughout, that they were just privy to. They just, you know, were stuck. I'm sure you're talking about, yeah. Yeah, talking about amazing rules. Yeah, yeah. Amber, well, yeah, yeah. And Amber Diceless was early. That was the late 80s. That was a really early game that made this attempt at let's take. And there were a couple other really small ones too, that were kind of like fairy tale games that tried to take away the let's kill monsters and get treasure emphasis. Now, when all those games came out, just going back to the topic, there were a lot of hardcore D&D heads that absolutely hated this idea of a game where you were not getting more powerful and getting more stuff. And people playing those games weren't considered hardcore. You know, they were kind of the outcasts among this world of outcasts. You know what? You're running around dressed up like a vampire all weekend. What's wrong with you? There's something wrong with you. You know, there's this guy who's been sitting in like, you know, the same underwear for 3 days playing a dwarf. You know, it's like it's like, okay, buddy. You know, I think we got to balance our idea of you know clicks and normalcy here. Yeah, well, Carrie ran Amber Forest once, and it was just it was so that was my impression of it. That was my impression of it, and I am not a guy that is stuck on this rule has to be defined everywhere. But even when Carrie was running it, my whole issue was okay. So you're basically just making it up and telling us who wins and who doesn't, and that actually really bugged me. I was like, no, that's not a game then. That's just sitting around and playing make believe. And maybe there was more to it that I wasn't seeing. And I've had that discussion with people about the World of Darkness games, where they rely so heavily on this concept of the storyteller system, automatic successes. There really is no randomness, and there's very little agency in what's going to happen. Well, that's the reality. And that was part of the discussion when I last ran Cthulhu. Is like Fran said to me, like at one point, and Fran's pretty familiar with the Lovecraft mythos. He said, you know, part of the problem I'm having with this game is that the knowing the Cthulhu mythos, there's almost no payoff at the end because we know things are just going to get worse, and no matter what we do, we'll never really succeed, and our characters will never really get better. And I said I agree, but don't forget, in the context of the game, you can regain sanity. You could do things like that. You can learn new things to help you defeat the unknown forces. So I think it was part was the group having to kind of recontextualize what winning was. Oh yeah, yeah. No, again, I've been to plenty of convention groups playing D&D that I just was like I would never play with these people regular, or even a couple online D&D groups that I jumped into. I was like, yeah, no, this their idea of D&D and mine. I mean, they're basically playing a video game with dice, and I'm like, no. Yeah, so I never actually played any of Sean's games, but I mean, I run when I do run World of Darkness, I run in a very narrative fashion. But the dice and the power still mean something because they're in the, you know, that's the way that you gauge what you can negotiate in a world. And that's why I try to like keep it, you know, keep it rulesy without it being so rulesy that people are bored to tears. Because as anybody who's played any of my games, which is a few people on here know, I I am more about the story. I'm more about exporting exporting characters generated with Baldur's Gate. Yeah. No, yeah, that's yeah. No, it's well. I mean, PJ can testify when we ran LARPs and people would show up with the characters they had made at home, and it was just like the most ridiculous, like power. If this is vampire, it was like, oh yeah, I have misplaced heart, an iron will, and I'm actually seventh generation. Oh, and I'm also a cyborg sent from the future who's here to hunt vampires. I mean, I literally had something like this in one of the games I ran, and the guy handed me the sheet, and I just laughed at him. I'm like, you're not a cyborg. Maybe you're an insane vampire who thinks he's a cyborg. It's like, no, my character in my game, I'm a cyborg from the future hunting vampires. I'm like, well, you're not here. And there goes that total like power geekery that you think is gone from vampire. You're just like, oh my god, like that's just yeah, no. Well, yeah. I mean, that's part of what I've talked about in some of the other discussions, right? Like, what keeps people coming back from these games should not be the editing parties. Yeah, I was at one of those. I was at one of those editing parties at the game. Yeah, I was actually at one of those at their place at one point. Yeah, yeah, pretty much. I remember that. But it was stuff. You've seen it too. But that's the thing. Like, I think people should come back to games because they are satisfied playing in the world and getting moments out of the story versus, oh, I'm coming back because I want to just like raise my character some more. But that is part of it. Yeah, yeah. So it's funny because Neil has actually talked about that. He's tried to play with his family, who are all he has two stepdaughters, a son, and his son's a gamer. Like he's a computer gamer, and he's kind of interested in D&D. But again, I think his idea at this point, at being 15, would be very different than what ours would be. But like when he's played these games with his family, getting their trying to get them into the idea of role playing, the single biggest thing his daughters have had the trouble wrapping their mind around is that it's not a board game, it's not a competitive contest, and it's like, oh, it's a game, but like who's gonna win? And that's something that is really difficult. And I remember that was the big joke, when we'd play D&D in high school at my house or someone else's house, where, someone's idiot father, usually mine or Blake's, would come in, oh, who's winning, And like four times a night they'd say, because they know they couldn't understand, they literally couldn't understand this idea of playing a game where you weren't winning or you weren't losing. And it's really interesting. And again, I'm glad to see, I say this every time we talk about any of this stuff. I'm super glad that um what else? Yeah. I'm reading your chats. I'm super glad that we have a hey, how's it going? No problem. So they don't know what you're. No, we've been talking about everything from our early experiences with power gamers to completely narrative experiences. A sim player, and all I ever wanted is find a gaming narrative focused sorts of games. Well, we talked a little bit about that. I don't know if I know you offline, and that's okay if I don't. Welcome, glad you popped in. So I think that's what we were just talking about. That in designing my own game, that's actually something I've been struggling with. Is how much of a simulation is this? Like, is it going to be a simulation in the sense that I'm going to make you feel like you're living in this world? And is that the point? When I'm working on the heritage and lineage traits right now. And so that's what I'm sitting there going and looking at today, in fact, is I'm sitting there going, you know, I think you know my wife. Maybe. It's not Ken. Or, oh, maybe. Somebody said last week their husband was going to try to jump in and chat because they missed it last time for dog walking, which is a reasonable reason to miss. I don't know if that was you or not. I'm on Facebook too. You can find me and add me and all that stuff. But yeah, I think so. So Simulation is such another thing, and that's what's interesting. Yeah, yeah, okay. I remember she shot me a note, or she commented like, "I'm going to tell my husband about this." Well, welcome. Good to see you. So that's interesting. I mean, I think in an R- RPG sense, there are games that have definitely been simulations. Iron Crown Enterprise, the Middle Earth roleplay, the Rollmaster system. I mean, to me, that was super simulation. But when you say simulation, like, what are you thinking? Are simulating being a gardener, or simulating being a warrior, or were you thinking what kind of paradigm were you thinking? And do you mean like war game level simulation? I mean, that to me is a different thing than than RPGs and very narrative kinds of games. But I'm curious. I'm curious about the context. Got to use an English degree for something, PJ. Adam can testify to that too. At least I can use some of the skills in my art degree for doing stuff like this. GURPS. Okay, so yeah, we actually had a long talk about stuff like that a few weeks ago, in or a couple months ago, in terms of systems like GURPS versus systems like Fate. Whereas Fate is super narrative. Fate is so loose. And White Wolf, that the storyteller system, which we've all played and we talk about quite a bit here, is so loose. Yeah. Um, I think, I mean, there's definitely people who play games that are more crunchy and more sim related. As far as our group here, I think we've all probably played those type of games. I don't know what anyone's doing right now as far as stuff like that. I mean, I'm thinking like the original versions of Cyberpunk too, which I know PJ and I talked about extensively. GURPS is extremely streamlined. Yeah, like Hero. So Hero's another one. I think Hero's a little more narrative than GURPS. Um, I ironically I've only ever played GURPS. I've only ever played. I've the only GURPS I've ever played has been GURPS Vampire at a con. But I was like, wow, this is like really mechanical, coming from the very loose version of Vampire we were used to. Hero's a brilliant system though. I mean, Shadowrun. I mean, I can't even say I think that that's very sim. I just think it's got a lot of rules. As I've said, it's the most brilliant game that you never complete, that you never can actually sit down and play. Yeah, I mean, Hero. I mean, I was into Champions. That was the only superhero game I ever got into because of the system, which became the Hero system. And again, I I actually revisited it recently just to take a look at it. I thought it was really good still, but it was dense compared to most of the games that I play these days. I even Call of Cthulhu, I make the characters much less numbersy and rulesy and dicey than what they're supposed to be, mainly because I just focus on the story elements. Well, it's funny. So, a friend of mine that was over a couple of weeks ago was saying about a guy that we both know. And when you meet him, you kind of think, is this guy an android? Because he's, first of all, he's brilliant, like literally brilliant. Brilliant at everything he does: music, art, math, science. I mean, he literally, you're just like, this guy's an android. And apparently, he came into their D&D game one week, and he got into an argument with the game master because he has to know the phase of the moon to determine how far his character could actually see in the moonlight. And it's like, and that goes back to that kind of simulation level interest that we're talking about. Like, that is totally not for me. But there are definitely players out there who want that. I remember sitting down at a Shadowrun game at a con not that long ago. Well, long ago, but not the 90s. I think Origins that I went to maybe in the early 2000s, mid 2000s, and these guys had figured out, like, down to what kind of round, every one of their guns had. And it was just kind of like, I was like, this is way too crunchy of a group for my personal taste. Yeah. Yeah. More things work in the world than in rules that are focused on creating a story. Okay. Interesting. And I like that. I like having that different voice here because most of us like, we don't really worry about rules necessarily creating the story, but we're much more story focused. I mean, yeah, like the game that comes to mind for that contemporary game is Shadowrun. And and that but it's so arcane, it's difficult. Let's see, Savage Worlds. Savage Worlds is definitely more it's somewhere between narrative story, but there's still a lot of rules to it. You might be interested in Savage Worlds. Um, yeah, everything about ballistics is random. Yeah, yeah. Well, that's all about point of view, PJ. That's interesting. Yeah, Mage is another one. Mage is another one of those in that category of one of the single greatest games ever written that you really just can't play unless you have just the right group because it's so kind of loose and interpretive. And by the way, I love it. The original Mage the Ascension. But you read it and you're just like, this is just never going to work with real humans. Like, in the abstract, if you have a hand picked group, fantastic. Yeah, who is creative? I would, if you're interested in looking at vintage games, Narfref, I would, if you haven't, I would definitely go back and take a look at like Rollmaster and stuff like that too. Like, when I think of games that are more of a simulation, that's one of the first one that comes to mind because it's so mechanical. And it's very interesting. I mean, Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay is kind of like that, but it's very geared towards the Warhammer world. I'm just gonna sit here and let you guys chat. I'm just enjoying reading the comments. I hope we're at least being a little helpful. Um, I don't I don't necessarily have a concrete answer for stuff that's more simulation that's newer. Oh yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, fighting. Though the game is called Warhammer, and the goal is that you're supposed to be standing on a pile of bodies by the time you're done. You never actually want to get in a fight. But that was kind of like Cyberpunk too. If your characters didn't have a whole lot of armor, the idea of actually getting into a shootout in Cyberpunk was a pretty dumb idea. I mean, Cyberpunk's another one I think is very simulation like. At least I haven't looked at Red Book. Yeah, unfortunately, we're all over the place. I don't even know where you guys are at. Um, we've got well, Tom and I are in Southeast PA, and we've never actually managed to get together for a game. Uh, PJ is now in Massachusetts, and Adam's up in upstate New York, and Justin's local to me too. North Carolina. I don't know if we have any North Carolina people on here tonight. But you know what? Like, feel free on my various like online resources, like either on my Facebook, you know, game page, I mean, feel free to post. I haven't gotten a lot of that type of interaction going on, but I certainly think it's great to facilitate. You can also go on, and I don't know if you're interested in doing anything online, but Roll 20. I mean, there's a lot on Roll 20. People playing just about everything on Roll 20 if you're interested in sitting in a virtual tabletop environment. It is free, it is easy to use. Yeah, I remember reading about what they did to make Cyberpunk. And yeah, going through all these ballistics files and all this kind of stuff. And I'm just like, man. Now, did any of you ever look at the hardwired rules based on Walter John Williams' hardwired universe, the cyberpunk universe Walter John Williams created, that totally streamlines a lot of that combat? And everything is done in weapon classes. Yeah. And I thought that was great because that actually made a lot of cyberpunk more playable to me. That different weapon classes and ballistic classes could outclass. Yeah, that's tough. That's tough. Well, I mean, that's actually part of why I do the game, this chat at this time slot, is because I have the house to myself for a few hours because my significant other works late. I mean, she doesn't care if I do it, but it's just easier to do it when I kind of have control over the whole space. I would also look around. I'm trying to think what resources are out there for group meetups. If you send me a Facebook message, I'll take a look around for any kind of messaging groups that I might find. There's a couple tabletop RPG groups on Facebook that are okay. And if you put a shout out for players, yeah, they're more into Power by the Apocalypse, OSR, 5e. Yeah, into more narrative stuff. Could always run a game, advertise, heavy simulation. You must like dice, must like dice rolling and rules. I mean, I know there's an audience for it. There's definitely an audience for it. Like Fuzzy, who's not on tonight now. He's up in North Jersey, so that won't help you. He's a big Twilight 2000 fan, and that game is like, again, that's another one like Cyberpunk where you're just sitting there. Yeah, I don't even know if it's still available. It's probably out of print. I don't even know if I still have a copy there, Tom, hardwired, but it was an official Cyberpunk supplement written by the guy who wrote the book called Hardwired, and it's a really interesting take on a cyberpunk world. Yeah, let me just take a quick look here. There's a couple groups that I know of that do meetup stuff. Let me see if I can find them easily. If not, send me a message through Facebook, and I can find them. Like there's the tabletop RPG group. Let me see if I can find it. Now, I absolutely cannot vouch for the players you might find in these groups, but hello. My search decided. Oh, here we go. This is probably the single most helpful group. I don't know if you've become involved with. Let me put it in chat here. That's not letting me paste. I know people have advertised for like looking for group and stuff on there. You could take a look. Like I said, I can't vouch. Oh yeah, I got what you mean. Like I think about something like Traveler, which Twilight 2000 was an evolution of, where the whole point wasn't to go around and get into combat, but yeah, when it happened, it was extremely realistic. So that's a really good question. Oh boy. You know what? I think we're gonna save that for a whole other chat, Tom, because I've had really extensive conversations with Neil in particular. So for as progressive as I am in every way, culturally, socially, politically, thinking about RPGs, sometimes when the GM hands half the work off to the players, I'm like, dude, come on. I'm here to play a game, not help you write your story. And I understand that's a very old way of looking at it. Like Neil has been sending me stuff from I think Powered by the Apocalypse, and I'm just like, I don't get it. He's like, what do you mean you don't get it? He's like, it's it's about story beats and sharing narrative. I'm like, so what are you doing as the game master? He's like, I'm just facilitating. I'm like, okay. And I understand it's very much a point of view thing. But what's funny is in all of our games, I'm usually the first one to be like, oh, your character wants to do that? Why don't you tell me how that happens? Oh yeah, the 10-page backstory. Yeah, there's that is a whole other discussion. That is and right. It's very system based. It's very system based in terms of game master focused versus shared narrative focused. That's a very different thing. Yeah, backstories. I'm kind of at the point where I tell people don't hand me a 10-page backstory. Like well, so Vampire is one of those games where of course I'm saying this and I'm totally full of it because one of my favorite games ever is Ars Magica, where the players literally have to do as much work as the game master in at least setting up the game. When you set up your covenant and your chantry house and all that. I appreciate it when people send me a long backstory, but here's a reality. And maybe this goes back to our hardcore versus casual discussion. If I'm sitting with two people and I'm doing a focused narrative game, I can delve into their history and their backstories. When I have 8 people around a table or 7 people around a table and we have 4 hours to play or less, there is absolutely no way I'm getting to everybody's individual stories. That I physically can't. I just don't have time. I'd love to, but I don't have time. Oh yeah, I think I've only played Ars Magic once, and I've only run it twice. I think it's great, but you have to have a group that's so dedicated to this idea, and it's all historical. So half of it, and that's part of why I like it, because half of it is going through medieval history. Oh yeah, absolutely. Right now, our D&D/vampires/ Call of Cthulhu game on average has 7 people. We actually just had a player decide to take a break, and that's okay. And let's make sure nothing I gotta. Oh, fuel to the fire. Someone just sent me a text that added fuel to the fire. Compared to Pathfinder, D&D is nothing but a storyteller game. That is really hilarious because that was just sent to me totally unsolicited. They are not part of this chat, and it was part of a whole other discussion I was having with a couple of my buddies. And I've been harassing Blake because he's running 5e and not Pathfinder, but I'm only kidding. I mean, I'm busting on him. Oh yeah, that's gonna be a whole oh, I had people dislike my video, like dislike it actively because I compared Pathfinder and D&D, and it was absolutely hilarious when I basically said Pathfinder for depending on what you want. Now Pathfinder again goes back to that conversation. In many ways, Pathfinder gets a lot more simmy, gets a lot more rulesy. I love it. I love the characters you can create in Pathfinder far more than Fifth Ed D&D. But I wouldn't run Pathfinder with my current group because they're not that interested in the rules. They're interested in just the story and they're interested in playing the characters. So Fifth Ed's perfect. But it's just hilarious. I get that text from him right now in the middle of this chat, and he's not even in here. But yeah, our current group's pretty big, and in fact, I've even had other people who have said, yeah, exactly. Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. Chode lives on. Absolutely. That was the most ridiculous thing. When Tim was like, "You guys each make two characters," I'm like, "I'm not making two characters. Like, this is gonna take all night to make one character." I'm like, "No, you're getting El Chode. That's it. You're getting my gnome named El Chode. That's the most you're getting." I'm like, "I'm not making two or three characters each." I got why he wanted to do it because we could easily get killed, and that was the whole point of the story, and that's what was funny. But I didn't even mind about characters getting killed. It was just the way it was. And in fact, I've actually had to turn people away from our current game just because it's just too many people. Like another friend of the group, her boyfriend's really interested. I'm like, it's already just too many people. It's too many people to schedule around and to have at the table. I mean, yeah, we have a person taking a break now, but I think having one less person. That's like when Tom jumped in for the couple game sessions, and people talked about Tom coming and playing regularly. I'm like, no offense, but no. I'm like, I love Tom. He's a good friend of mine in many years, but there's too many people here at the table right now. It's really difficult. Yeah, so Pathfinder 1 either was definitely the power creep of 3.5. And I totally get it. I mean, the one game of Pathfinder 1 I played, I'm like, don't think so. 2E is definitely more streamlined. And again, what I love is the detail you can put into the characters. You can make 5 first level gnome fighters and they're totally different. Or whatever. Or not totally different, but different enough. It is 5e is so accessible. We got our group, most of which had never played D&D, and I've said this repeatedly, jumped in running and we were playing within a couple hours. You can never do that with Pathfinder or 3.0 D&D. Oh yeah. Oh, it is absolutely. But it really works at what it does. And we don't really need. And again, I've maybe I can revisit a whole other chat about D&D and the evolution of D&D, but it's a party barge, and what really got me is just how much damage the characters do even at low levels. I had to adjust to that as a game master. I remember like third level, I threw like some giant at them, like a hill giant or something, and they just wiped it up. And I'm like, wow, that should never have happened. Like I'm still thinking in 3.0 D&D where half the party would be dead, and they didn't have to fight it, by the way, or an Etin or something. They ran across it while they were traveling. They didn't have to fight it, but they chose to, and they mopped it up. And I'm like, wow. Like, okay, I just have to think differently about this game than I do about other versions. But no, I'm not going to sit and knock any particular play style or what people want out of it. It's easier as a GM. I can run. I never like to admit this, but I don't, but I could run 5e with very little preparation in terms of the rules, the NPCs. But is that bad? Right? There we go back to the discussion. Hardcore. What's a hardcore gamer? Having to control your 5 different Pathfinder NPCs that are that unless you have to look up like every 3 things they do unless you were an encyclopedia of the rules, or control 2 of your 3 of your 5e NPCs, which are you can do almost intuitively. Changeling is another one. It's so difficult. It's such a great concept. I'll tell you what, the best game that White Wolf ever put out that nobody knows about. Changeling, or no, Fairy the Dark Ages, where you actually play a fairy in medieval Europe. And it's on par of Mage with that complete, almost indecipherable esoterica. And it's a fantastic game, but I could never imagine actually running or playing this. I'm like, this is such a great intellectual exercise, but it is so abstract. Yeah, absolutely. We're Druna the RPG, yeah, basically. High Lung the RPG, which is basically, Changeling Dark Ages, pretty much. Changeling, yeah, with Changeling the rules were really bad. The rules were really bad. The concept was good. The characters were interesting. The rules were rough. Hole. Yeah, hole. Oh, the whole no, hole's a total. I still have hole. I still have hole and buttery wholesomeness. Yes, that was yeah, that was like we saw that at a game convention. Our group picked it up and looked at it. We all looked at each other. We're like, we're gonna play this next week, aren't we? That was just the most twisted shit I've ever seen. I was like, man. I was like, I can't even believe they published this. Yeah, that was probably the same year I got it at DEF CON, I think, PJ, 'cause we got it at DEF CON. Harry from Dragon Sword had it. I don't know if that guy's even still around. Harry from Dragon Sword, all this weird. He had all this old, like really obscure early gaming stuff that I never even seen at that time. It was like, but yeah, he got whole. Yeah, exactly. It's like Traveler written by Guar. Exactly. Yep. Yep. Yes, it's completely out of control, irreverent, twisted. It's hilarious. I actually just pulled that book out not too long ago because I was like, did I just hallucinate that book? Like, did I, it's kind of like after you see Pulp Fiction for the first time, where you walk away going, did I, did I really just see all that? And then you go back and I was reading the book, I'm like, oh my god, it's even worse than I thought. Like, yep, yep, yep. That was some disturbing stuff. Lead Pipe. Yep. The kid's name is Lead Pipe. Yep. Yeah, that game was definitely a trip. I like that Traveler written by Guar. Yeah, pretty much. So what else you guys got for me? I think we'll close up in a little bit, but any parting thoughts? That's a whole other topic, Tom. I think we're going to talk about maybe next week we'll talk about player agency versus GM agency. I talk a little bit about that like tangentially in one of my other discussions or videos, but catch you later, Justin. Thanks for stopping in. I'll look forward to seeing you this weekend. Well, yeah, and that's kind of why I started this talk too. Like people do play games for different reasons. Like Narfref's into the more simulation, world mechanics rules. Some of us are clearly, and again, I know some people we know like Sean Jaffe and other people I've known throughout the years are even more into the freeform and story than I am. And I think I'm kind of in the middle. Like I said, in working on Tales, that was a big discussion. The original rules were like very loose. Agency is an illusion? Yeah, I mean, to a degree. To a degree. Absolutely. Send it over. Send it over and post it up. So I mean, eventually I want to make these even more collaborative. Like do like collaborative video chats and have a forum where people can post gaming stuff they're working on and whatever. I'm not at that point yet. I did talk to Jen, Page's wife, about working on the website with me, and I think that's going to happen. I think we're gonna I think we're gonna move ahead with that. I haven't gotten back to it this week because I got real life, that stuff we talked about just crept in, and I didn't get to actually look at any of the sites she recommended I start looking at to get an idea of what she wants to do and what she can do. So, but I did I took a quick look at her work, but then I didn't investigate like ground site or anything like that any further. So, all right, gentlemen, thanks for tuning in. Come on back in another week or two. I'll probably do it next week. I don't see why not. Great having you, Narf. Thanks for coming on. Munchkin's Guide to Power Gaming. No, I haven't seen that. Or I was asking Wendell. No, I haven't seen that. Don't do that, Narf. Don't remind me. Don't remind us that something was 20 to 25 years ago. I have that happen regularly. Oh, that was only 10 years ago. Oh, shit. No, it wasn't. It was 20 years ago. Well, and I know in some games, especially stuff like Call of Cthulhu and other horror and mystery games, part of it is making the players feel like they're actually progressing it. When there's a lot of points where you are complete, that's all right. Happens all the time. There's where you're actually controlling the agency. But there are a lot of the new style games definitely do focus on the players having as much control over the narrative as the game master. And again, I have such mixed feelings on this, and this is that one point where when I first started doing this, I had a friend watch it who's maybe a little younger than I am, but around our general age group, say, "Oh, I thought you were gonna be one of those guys that hated all this new gaming," and I'm like, hated all these different people coming into gaming. I'm like, why would you think that? Like, I love it. I love the games going in all these different directions, but there are certain things where I'm always like, kind of, kind of old school, and I'm like, the game master should do the work. That's why you're the game master. But there's different. It's an interesting discussion. I should really get my friend Neil on here for that because he and I have had actual he's the guy that just sent the joke about Pathfinder and D&D. But oh, I know. Trust me. I mean, all the gaming forums I'm on, people are pretty cool, and they're cool with new people and new players. But there are a few that they start talking, and you're like, dude, just shut up. Like, you know, we want different people. We want younger people in these hobbies. Like, don't turn people off. Oh, the White Wolf games too. The White Wolf games are a lot about though it's kind of a meta thing, right? Yeah, we had that go. Oh, there was a whole joke about that on a friend of mine's thread recently. I was like, keep your damn Thaco. I'm so glad we're done with Thaco. I'll take progressive armor class any day. Um, yeah, and the White Wolf games are definitely another one. It's kind of this meta thing because the whole theme of many of the White Wolf stories are manipulation and control, and really for as much as you let the players create the world with you, in the end, your job as storyteller is to kind of manipulate those situations. All right, guys, gonna log off. Thanks for coming on. I'll shoot out a note for next week. It was a really good discussion. I'll leave the chat open for a minute or two. Great seeing everyone. Thanks for coming on. Great meeting you. Catch y'all later.